Hello, welcome again to Hendrix Dota. Today I'm going to be doing my patch 7.35b tier list for the mid lane or pos 2 position. This tier list is designed more for my predictions about kind of what's going to be good in competitive play this season. It's not really tailored necessarily to pubs or solo play, which you'll probably be able to kind of pick up on this theme throughout this video. So, starting from the bottom of D tier character stat. In this tier, I think this is either maybe has only one usage case scenario for each of these heroes, or it's just generally speaking somewhat weak. The first we have is Mirana. I think Mirana is actually a fairly decent hero. She received some buffs to her Starstorm ability,
Mirana.
and she also received she received a critical strike talent. I think it's level 15 if I'm not mistaken. So Mirana has a little bit more potential as a core. I think she's a fairly good offlaner, even honestly almost playable as position 1. But she's still kind of niche and difficult to play, and skill shot based. I might maybe tended to put her in C tier, because I think she's very much akin to Pudge, where it's kind of individual player ability. I mean, obviously somebody like a Samael could potentially play this, but you really have to know what you're doing. Leshrac obviously got gutted with the Bloodstone nerf. I was of the opinion, even before that he kind of rose to prominence, that Leshrac was fairly decent. I think on my last tier list video, I either had him C or B tier. But the Bloodstone nerf, basically removing his ability to generate mana, as well as the powerful Mage Slayer item, which you'll notice on this video, I'll talk about it more, is I think sort of the meta-defining item from the mid lane, if not really the main one. I think that he's nigh unplayable. If you're very competent in Leshrac and you build particular mana regeneration items, like Eternal Shroud, potentially Scythe or Yules, then I think he can kind of be played, but it's just way too difficult to do for a character that's already kind of tricky. I'm not going to speak too much on Alchemist. I think that the tempo of the game was a bit slow for Alchemist, and from the mid lane, the problem is that for Alchemist to function, he has to basically get all the resources on the team, and that's not really the mid's job. But at this point in time, the mid's job is more something like ganking and running around and helping teammates, which Alchemist can do, but he really needs Farn to be able to do that. So for that reason, I don't think that he is excellent from the mid lane at this point in time. Razor. Razor's just... he's okay as an offlaner and sometimes as a pos 1, but the meta isn't really melee, big auto attack damage dealers from mid. So for that reason, I think he's gonna kind of be low. Sniper, of course, this character is going to be good if you're just stomping in low MMRs, and the character is better than he's been in the past. I think too with the Divine Rapier being a much better item. You'll see snipers literally do 4 of these sometimes, and it can kind of be powerful with stomping noobs, but in a competitive game where sniper's not going to get as many resources, and he's going to be trying to gank people and provide space for his team, the character's far too frail. It doesn't offer... basically, if you get shut down one time, it's not 4v5 until hyper late game, so he's not good. My opinions on Tinker are the same from my last video. I mean, Tinker has been over the past year or so kind of reduced in power, I would say, and to the point now where even if you're like a Tinker Smurf, I don't think he's very good. And in competitive, the thing about Tinker is that he's one of these very greedy mid heroes where he can kind of hog up resources and accelerate the pace of the game by jumping into fights or powerful item actives and kind of stomping supports and stuff. But in a competitive game where there's going to be ganking, where you need CC, or you need people to have an early timing, Tinker has kind of a little bit of a later timing than the other mids do. I don't think he's as good, especially now. Obviously, it's been quite some time, but since his March of the Machines ability was removed, he can't even really farm as fast as it used to, so I don't think the hero is very good. Riki's almost kind of a ditto in a sense. This is like a good pub stomper because he runs around invisible and kills people, but in competitive where people are going to be buying gem or sentry wards, he's not as good, and obviously he doesn't really even gank particularly effectively. Winter Wyvern's received some buff. I was tempted to put her maybe a little bit higher, but I still think Winter Wyvern is a little bit underwhelming from the mid position. I think she's actually a lot better as a support because her heal's quite strong, but her damage is still kind of not fantastic. I mean, I would probably, if I did this again, maybe even move her up to C, because I think she's okay, but I don't think she's devastating enough with the ultimate to really be very good most games. Coming into, and you know what, I'll do this before I progress in my general thoughts on mid lane. They're sort of the same as they've been for a while. Mid lane is about hitting a timing at like between level 6 to 8, 6 to 10, and running around and killing the enemies in the other lanes. You want to join the game very early. You want to typically have a combination of mobility, burst damage, crowd control, or some mixture of those. So characters that are good mid lane are characters that, you know, can go through the lane phase and basically run around and do that. There are subtypes of those characters like Huskar, who, while they don't necessarily run around and gank super effectively, their job is more to pummel the enemy mid laner or Viper and defeat them and accelerate the game that way. And there's other mid laners who accelerate the game by taking turrets, like Lone Druid, who I should have put on this tier list if I get time. I'll place them. Who accelerate the game by, you know, taking towers and kind of strangling the enemies. In this C tier, we'll see characters that are a little bit more niche but have more usages than the D tier. Earth Spirit's been nerfed quite a bit since his prominence, the main nerf being the one to his cooldown build, which now his the cooldown begins after he's gone to his destination, so he has less mobility to run around and kill everybody. That and his classic Blade Mail Heart build has been gutted. Heart's now not really a buildable item. You can still build Blade Mail. I'm not quite sure why Blade Mail's fallen off as much. I think, Blade Mail still remained somewhat decent, but Earth Spirit doesn't really have a fantastic item path to go, and he's somewhat slow and clunky. I still actually think that this character could show up decently in competitive, even though I think he's weak, just because I think he has kind of a satisfying, somewhat easy to execute kit, actually, even though he's rated as a difficulty 3. I think it's fairly simple to just kind of roll into the enemies and stun them, especially if you're coordinated as a team. So he might actually show up quite a bit, even though I don't think he's the strongest. A character that's probably not going to show up regardless of his strength is Bounty Hunter. Bounty Hunter from the mid position is quite powerful, even though I have him kind of low, especially with his level 25 talent now, where he has no cooldown on Giada, and his Conda build, where he can just annihilate you. The problem with Bounty Hunter is he's one of the only characters who's weakened by the Solar Crest change. Obviously, they've had to gut Solar Crest, but he was one of the characters, along with Clinks, who benefited strongly from the Solar Crest placing on enemies. Now that he can't do that, I think he actually has lost a little bit of potency. At the same time, his later timings are a little bit better. The issue with Bounty Hunter in competitive relates to basically what I said about Riki, is that against enemies who are going to have sentries, gems, and general awareness of things, Bounty Hunter isn't going to get the opportunity to run around and get kills. And then if he's slowed down, or if the game is put into a lull state, Bounty Hunter doesn't really farm particularly fast. Because that's kind of a secondary thing that the mid does as opposed to the supports, where, like, you don't necessarily have some of the, you know, ganking supports like Tusk or something here, is that they don't farm particularly effectively. You do want the mid to be able to farm if the game does go into a lull state, and that's something that Bounty Hunter doesn't do particularly well. Dragon Knight at the moment is not terrible. They made it to where his Q applies his dragon form breath attack to targets, so Dragon Knight can kind of farm a little bit faster than he used to, but I think that he's still a little bit slow and clunky from the mid lane. He doesn't do very good damage, so his ganks are fairly subpar. He needs his allies to really do the majority of the damage for him. I mean, he can show up and just take the tower, but it's not the most reliable. It's just quite underwhelming. I think he's kind of playable as a position 1 or a position 3, but as a mid, he's not explosive enough. He can still be played as a counter to something like Helena, which is, designed to, or like a Huskar, designed to just stomp the lane. You can pick Dragon Knight in that instance, so that's why he's not dog shit, but he's not great. Omni Knight also is a character that benefits well from the Kanda item because it builds out a phylactery, which is an item he likes quite a bit. The difficulty with Omni in a competitive game is that Omni doesn't necessarily farm super fast, and he's not mobile, so if the game, it's kind of hard for Omni Knight to have like super explosive ganks where he's locking down multiple people and killing them. And if the game goes into a lull state, Omni Knight's not gonna kind of keep pace with other people at the same rate as something like a Kunkka will. But he's still, I think, a bit underrated. I think, too, with the ultimate change, combined with his W and maybe your teammate having a BKB, you can basically give your ally quite a bit of time of physical immunity and protect them from being nullified with your W. So I think Omni Knight is a little bit underrated. Yeah, but just not the best ganks overall. Ogre was actually statistically, I think, one of the better mids of this past TI, but he wasn't played very much. Ogre has some interesting items, potentially, item combinations, with the big patch we had. You can potentially do something weird like E-Blade in addition to Kaya Sanj or something strange like that. And he also can kind of use the Parasma item, okay, but it's sort of golden efficient. The point is that Ogre has, as he always has, he has some interesting item combinations that I think if players figure it out could increase his power. I think Ogre's very good as an offlaner. I think as a mid, he kind of needs to get in a competitive game. He needs like a Blink Dagger to be able to initiate, somewhat similar to a Dragon Knight, and that's kind of disadvantageous from the mid lane. You kind of want, as I kind of said, you want the mid laner to be mobile because they're running around and ganking so much. So them having to buy a Blink Dagger isn't the greatest thing. Ogre also wants to buy Midas, which kind of also gives him a bit of a slower timing. So he's a little bit better suited to the offlane. In addition, his build list can empower his ally. But Ogre is definitely a good hero who I think can be picked. Doom's also been buffed slightly. I think Doom in general, as a hero, is decent at the moment. He's not great from mid, because his explosiveness isn't very high. Of course, his ganks, if he gets in range to get Doom on you, it's virtually guaranteed kill, even by himself. So I can't really, in good conscience, put him in D tier, but he's a better offlaner. Shadow Fiend is just not particularly good. I think Shadow Fiend will still see some play, because I think there's just certain players that like the hero. He has, the powerful lane phase, but his ganks are quite underwhelming. He can get shut down very easily. I don't consider the character to be very good. I could be wrong, but yeah, that's my opinion. Nyx Assassin. I actually have felt that Nyx Assassin has far less mana problems than he used to. I kind of feel that if you do something interesting like build a Dagon and then immediately go into something like Octarine Core, it kind of alleviates Nyx's mana problems and he can actually farm quite well with a build like that. And he's one of the best position 4s at the moment. And I think he even will be good and competitive. Because if he does get in range of you in stealth, it's virtually a guaranteed kill. Even without his ultimate, if there's a fight, Nyx would just, his Q, a Dagon, and like a E-Blade, and then his W, he can still virtually almost one-shot somebody. He also has a very powerful late game if he can get to it with his Scepter. So I think Nyx Assassin has some potential. He's just a little bit clunky and a little bit awkward to play in team fights, especially once his E is down. He can be quickly killed if he steps out of position. if he gets like isolated or something. So definitely requires some skill to pull off and some good luck. Pudge. My thoughts on Pudge are the same as they've always been. This is a skill-based hero where if you hit your skill shots, if you're somebody like Dindy and you can do that, then you're going to have a great game. And he'll be playable and competitive. If the player in question isn't good at hitting skill shots and good at piloting the hero, then he's not going to be good. Dazzle got his item interaction removed on his ultimate, so he can no longer do annoying things like use Bling Dagger or Midas. So he's a lot worse, but the character can still kind of be played as like a lane bully slash support. I think he's maybe a little bit better as a support now, just because the item interactions were removed. But he can still basically kind of like stomp his lane and then be oppressive with his scepter as before. He just doesn't have as many interesting interactions as he once did. He's easier to kill, essentially. Spirit Breaker, this character didn't even receive that particularly hard of a nerf at the TI, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, I mean, the issue will more be that I think this character tends to have priority as a support. But as a mid laner, he's totally playable too. Or as a support, also as an outlaw laner. But as a mid laner, he essentially does the same thing as he did in those rules as well. It's just about getting through the matchups, basically. But if he can do that and he can get to his late game, then he's going to have a BKB piercing AoE stun on a low cooldown. He just has a little bit of a difficult time getting to that position. Klinks is kind of the king of, very similar to Nyx Assassin, running around in stealth and exploding people. Unlike Nyx Assassin, he doesn't have crowd control, but he has range and he has a little bit more AoE damage. He also kind of has an ability to take turrets, though it's not fantastic. I don't anticipate this character will see too much playing in this coming season, but we never know. I think that it could be utilized. Monkey King. Monkey King requires pretty good knowledge of... He's a counter pick to melee heroes, and he requires pretty good knowledge of when it's essential to roam, when it's essential to farm. But if the player's good at Monkey King, then he has a lot of usefulness. So it's hard for me to put him too much higher, because I do think he is quite niche, but in the right game, quite powerful. Necrophos got absolutely gutted with the last set of nerfs and kind of the new item changes. I mean, some of them is that there's now Parasma in the game, which makes him even more vulnerable to magic damage. And then Revenants, the new Revenants basically allows you to toggle. So now with Revenants, you can just hit somebody in an ethereal form with no cooldown. So you combine those two things, it's very easy to blow a Necrophos up. That and Heart as an item is not as potent now, so he has less strength heroes to face into and drain their health. But if you do have a good Necrophos angle where they play kind of one of his traditional matchups he likes, like a Kunkka or Shaker or something, then he can still be played. But now, instead of just being good and just you having a high chance to win the game, you have to play him and you have to stomp the matchup. Wind Ranger, I think this character benefits decently from the new Maelstrom, where it gives more attack speed now, but it's still like a very kind of delicate timing-based hero where you really have to get a lot done at one item or something, and if you don't, you can just kind of feel useless. I think she could see some play in competitive just because she's evasive and she has the stun, and if you have an understanding of those timings, then you can, let's say do something like smoke with your team and then go in, land a stun on somebody, focus them down really quickly and kill them, or kill that target and then focus fire down on a second enemy in the team fight and kill them. So Wind Ranger, I think, in a competitive game could still kind of be useful, plus she has the ability to poke at enemies. to like defend a siege or push a siege with her teammate, in a sense, like go high ground. But she's not fantastic. She's a little bit flimsy, I would say. Okay, B tier. These are heroes that are generally good. We have Arc Warden. I might be undervaluing this hero because I know that a lot of people agree that Arc Warden is crazy. He has quite a few different builds at the moment that are really powerful. He has, of course, the Spirit Vessel build where you save your vessel charges and then ult, and then you can simply use them on enemies, and that's very powerful. But he also has builds with, Gleipnir or Mjolnir, or even interesting things, like Solarcrest. Basically, any item active, he can kind of utilize as Scythe. He has quite a few different builds where he can abuse these item actives. Scythe is, in my opinion, actually one of the most hidden, oppressive ones, where if you don't immediately rush into him and BKB him, and BKB yourself, he'll, ult and double scythe you and just kill you in that time period. It's quite hard to fight. He can also provide a lot of utility for his team by gaining vision of areas that you're going to siege, and then taking turrets with his, what I believe it's his E, the little field that gives you the evasion and attack speed for the Tempest Double. The reason I'm not going to put Arcwarden in S tier or A tier is that, again, relating to what the mid's job is competitively, Arcwarden doesn't really have explosive ganks. Quite the opposite, he kind of slowly ganks you by sending in Spark Wraiths. Like, you might send in a Spark Wraith in between your turrets if you're going that way, and then slow you, and then his allies will come and kill you, or he'll kind of zone you off. He plays the game at a little bit of a, I don't want to say slower pace, because Arcwarden's goal is to kind of strangle you out, take your turrets, and have an item lead over you, and push multiple lanes. So he does want to play the game in an accelerated manner, but Arcwarden isn't, stealth blinking on you and stunning and killing multiple people, which is, in a sense, kind of the mid's job in competitive. So it's hard for me to rate him too much higher than this, but I could be, I could definitely be mistaken. Earthshaker, I know the community's opinion is probably not that he's this good, but I still actually think Earthshaker is completely fine. I think if you're a very good Earthshaker at, again, this is talking about pros, at using the wall to cut off enemies in the team fights, then Earthshaker can basically always have a valuable game. That, too, with his Scepter to be able to he has very low cooldown, mobility, and AoE damage, and he has an incredibly powerful timing when he gets level 6 that's, quite frankly, almost unmatched in the game in terms of his ability to win a team fight if he shows up. If he gets, Invis Rune and Ultimate and runs into your lane, he can get a double kill very easily. So it's difficult for me to rate this guy much lower than B. Kunkka is actually quite very much in a similar vein. Kunkka has been nerfed time and time and time again. Now to the point that he's not kind of a brain dead free win, but if you play your matchup correctly as Kunkka and use your abilities correctly, it's quite similar to Earthshaker. It's one of the most simplistic, easy to execute mids competitively in Dota, where, especially if you're using smokes coordinated with your team, Kunkka can, with his allies, go up to an enemy, use X marks to spot, and until you get to a point in the game where your foes have like multiple dispels and crap, they're going to die. In a team fight, if it's a team fight happening before enemies get like multiple or get sources of spell immunity, his Torrent Storm ability and his Tidal Wave can also swing the fight in his favor. He has so much AoE control in the team fights, and he has so much freedom with how he itemizes. That's why, I don't even consider what happened where Heart's been gutted to even be that big of a nerf to Kunkka, because, well, Kunkka doesn't, that's just something he was abusing at that time period. Kunkka can build virtually any items that he wants to, and he's going to be good. Painkiller is another character, same category, that's been nerfed time and time and time again, but he's still pretty good. He has a certain level of power at level 6 is hard to deny, where he can very easily, run up on enemies, and especially if he's encountering like a support that's maybe 2 or 3 levels down on him, he can, especially too with the spell immunity, he can just very freely kill enemies in a manner that a lot of other characters can't replicate. And then this guy, as opposed to like Kunkka or Earthshaker, has also like, I would say, quite a good late game too. It has the ability to itemize things like Basher with his Q. So, I'm not going to spend too much time on him because you all kind of know the deal as to why this character's good. This might surprise some people because I know I've kind of heard other people saying they don't think Void Spirit's good, which I kind of am very much surprised by. I think Void Spirit's very powerful, relative to where he was in the past. He's received some buffs to his, I want to take a look at exactly. I know that he received a buff to his shield, and then, what else did he receive a buff to?
I step again into the mortal plane.
Yeah, he received buffs in 7 point. Let's see, 3, 4, and then more mana regeneration. Yeah, so he's been certain of a buff recently to make up for the lacking in power he's had, but I think also the current items really benefit him. So there's kind of 2 new meta-defining items that he uses very well. The first is Mage Slayer, which now I'll begin to talk about it. So Mage Slayer has been, even though it no longer builds into Bloodthorn, so it doesn't have a place in a build late game, as a mid-game transition item, Mage Slayer is nigh unmatched for a character like Void Spirit, where when he hits a basic attack on somebody with the Mage Slayer item, you're going to be reducing the enemy's spell damage by 40%, which is incredible. This item also has very good base stats on it. It has the magic resist, the attack speed, and it has something I think like 2.5 mana regen total. So that gives actually a character like Void Spirit, who has a little bit of mana issues, free reign of their mana pool in the mid game. And when he ults, since it's technically a basic attack that he's hitting you with, it's not like a cleave effect. He's applying this on multiple enemies. So Void Spirit hits a very powerful timing with Mage Slayer, and then also with Kaya Sange, where even though he's lacking in sustain, he actually has quite enough regeneration to stay and gank and fight people. The reason I'm not placing him higher is, his CC's not the most reliable, and he can kind of be shut down by some of these lame bully characters like Huskar or Omni Knight. But if he's allowed to hit his sort of level 7 or 8 timing, he's very powerful. And a character that's also, oh yeah, I forgot to also mention it. The other item is Parasma. Even though he doesn't benefit from the projectile speed, Parasma as an item reduces enemy magic resistance by 20%, which again, this will apply to his ultimate. It also complements very nicely with Mage Slayer because Parasma gives you armor. So he's able to dash in there, apply the Mage Slayer debuff, which also, by the way, happens to do damage. It does 20 damage per second for 6 seconds. Parasma has a flat damage effect on it with Witchblade, so he's doing quite a bit of damage per second with that when he ults you. And then he's reducing your magic resistance, and the powerful thing about that is not only do Void Spirit's other spells do magic damage, but his ultimate proc does magic damage. So Void Spirit can ult in and absolutely blow somebody up. And Ember Spirit, as a little bit, I think, more of a popular hero, he's received some buffs to compensate for the string of nerfs he received last year. And now he's quite playable. I think he also uses the Mage Slayer item pretty well. Like Void, maybe not quite as good because he's not universal. So Void can use that intelligence a little bit better, but still somewhat well. I don't really think he uses Parasma because I think that's going a little bit too far into intelligence. But Ember Spirit can, in my estimation, do something along the lines of like Mage Slayer Deso, something like that. BKB. He actually has some item builds, and it's just like the Ember Spirit from before, just not quite as oppressive, a little bit more skillful, because he still has, like, I don't think they buffed that cast point, did they? Let me see.
Guardian
No.
of the Flame.
So he's a little bit slow because his cast point still has those nerfs that they gave it, but Ember Spirit still has a lot of flexibility in his initiation, and his skirmishing's quite powerful. And now his laning is fairly good because they buffed his sleight of fist damage. So it's sort of like the Ember Spirit from before. The reason he wouldn't be higher is obviously this character is kind of punishing in terms of his errors. I would say, even though his difficulty isn't rated that high, I would say he's really one of the hardest characters in Dota because his ultimate takes up quite a bit of his mana pool. So if you ult in and don't kill your target, especially with its slow cast point, a burst spirit can very easily go in and get killed. So he's still somewhat difficult. Pugna's sort of the king, or one of them, with lane domination in the mid lane. He harasses you. A good Pugna player can easily take the turret by, something like 10 minutes at the maximum, if he's using his Nether Blast on it. And then he runs around the map and does the same thing that he did mid. He shows up in lane, drains your health to make you retreat, and then pushes his tower and also heals his teammates. The only reason, the weakness with Pugna is that he doesn't have the explosive initiation that some of these other characters like Earthshaker have. Pugna isn't gonna stealth approach you and 100 to 0 you necessarily, though it can feel like that sometimes. He's probably still a better support than he is a mid laner, but I see no reason why he's not playable as a mid. Tiny's received quite a bit of buffs in terms of his damage, I believe. I know they buffed his toss damage again, but they've buffed his tree grab damage, avalanche. They also buffed him on the previous patch. They also buffed him in November. So Tiny's back, I would say. I can say that fairly confidently. Did they also decrease the mana cost? I thought I read that. I can't recollect. Yes, they did. They did on Avalanche. Tiny does still kind of have... He is still kind of a little bit item dependent. He needs still Echo Saber, Blink Dagger. But once he gets to that point, which doesn't take him too long, he's one of the most explosive characters in the game. And he can solo supports very well and also deal very powerful damage in the team fights. And he's one of the better scaling mids because sort of classically he has his Daedalus Scepter build where he can annihilate foes in a team fight. So once he basically just, the issue with him is he allowed to get to the Echo Saber phase boots, blink timing. If he's not allowed to, then it can be kind of rough, which is where a character like Huskar comes in, because Huskar is picked as opposed for ganking. He's picked for his ability to dominate lanes. He was slightly nerfed. I think they nerfed the duration on Burning Spears.
There can never be too much sacrifice.
Yes, they did in October. But Huskar's, for the most part, still very powerful at shutting down the enemy laner. There's not too much to say about him. That's basically just his job. And he's a little bit less prominent this patch, I think because melee mids are not as prominent. But yeah, Huskar's still solid. This is another character I'm kind of completely in the minority on. The community consensus, is that Batrider's bad, whereas I really don't agree with this. I think Batrider's quite powerful. His laning, I think the reason maybe this is the idea, I think his laning is less powerful as it once was, but Batrider's ability to farm the map, I think he's just high skill is the problem with Batrider, because you have to understand how to use his Firefly to farm multiple camps at a time. You have to kind of get a resource advantage with him and abuse the Firefly. But if you do that, and you understand his timings, and you understand which pros will play with your team using the smokes, Batrider is still one of the best initiators in Dota by blinking on the enemies, dragging them with the lasso, dealing incredible damage, and then being able to build powerful utility items or tank items to support his team or for the lockdown enemies. The list is endless. You can do Scythe. You can do Lotus Orb. You can do Boots of Travel. He can choose any. He could choose either Overwhelming or Arcane Blink, depending on what he needs. Shiva's, which is obviously one of the most powerful items of the patch. He has a lot of versatility. Templar. You know what? I think I definitely put Templar too high. I'm gonna put her down. Templar is this character kind of fell off. I'm not entirely sure why. A couple months ago, she was considered like a really OP, and now she's not played as much. And I don't. Was she nerfed?
The temple sent me.
Yeah, doesn't seem like it. Yeah, I'm not sure why Templar fell off so hard. The character very similar to like a Shadow Fiend. I guess that's why I feel that it's fair to put him in the same tier on the list where they are DPS characters who also are like they have kind of an earlier timing and they can farm fast. She's also, in particular, why I think she's better is that she has more usefulness into other mid heroes. Again, I would cite something like an Earthshaker, where with her refraction she can like absorb burst damage very well. So that's why she's a little bit better for the mid, I think, than arguably position 1. Though I think people are playing her more position 1 nowadays. But, you know, her sort of ganking explosiveness isn't very potent unless she's able to hog up all the resources, which is kind of a problem in competitive. I mean, there are certain teams I've seen that do that, but it's a little bit trickier, and if you get behind, it's kind of difficult to come back, because now you don't have, say you're down like 10,000 gold, you don't have an explosive initiator who can pick a game-winning fight for you. You just have kind of another core who's kind of weak. So, yeah, she's kind of inflexible. Timbersol, this character's been buffed and buffed and buffed, and now he's fairly durable with his reactive armor. Timbersol is sort of a combination of, you know, winning lane and getting a resource advantage over his enemies, and then, unlike some other mids, he doesn't really have crowd control, but he has mobility. He has damage, he just doesn't have CC. What he instead has is durability, which some of these other mids don't really have. So if a team's going to pick Timbersol, then they'll need to make sure that they have certain other characters with crowd control to make up for this fact, and the Timbersol also needs to have a dominant lane performance. But if those things go right, then he's quite good. Viper. Trying to think here. I think definitely they changed his ultimate, where now his ultimate applies to break instead of his Nether Toxin, and now his Nether Toxin slows attack speed. That's overall a buff for Viper, because the issue before was, you know, the W applied the break, but enemies could just walk out of it, and it's, you know, a skill shot, and you don't really care about it applying the break in lane phase as much. Now, there's actually a specific reason to pick Viper. It's like you pick Viper, A, to win lane against some of these melee heroes, but B, you can pick Viper for the break. So if there's some character that you really need a break for, like a Spectre in the game or something like that, you know, Viper's a good candidate, and his ultimate pierces debuff immunity. So he's like 100% guaranteed to get it off. So Viper has kind of a niche situation. He's sort of niche, but within that niche, he's not unparalleled. So that's why I feel comfortable putting him in B tier. Keeper of the Light. I think I last time rated him as being someone I wouldn't really consider for the mid lane position. His stats at TI as a hero were not fantastic, but this character basically received a buff on like every single one of his abilities. Yeah, he received quite a few buffs, and Keeper of the Light plays it. He utilizes the Spirit Vessel item quite well. I guess because he can put the Spirit Vessel on his foes, and then he can blast them with his cube. He plays the game at quite a fast pace, because he clears mid with his Q, and then he can run into another lane and support his allies. He just doesn't have really explosive ganking, but I think he fares well into something like Alina, where he can kind of just go AFK in the lane by just kind of pushing it far away from you. So we'll have to see. I think he does have some usefulness. Storm Spirit. This character, actually, to my recollection, was the if we're talking about pure stats, the best character at TI, I think Storm Spirit's hero stats at TI were something like 6-0, which is not too large of a sample size, but it does show if Storm Spirit's put in the right hands and played competently, he's quite good. For sort of the same, I don't need to elaborate on it too much. We all kind of know that Storm Spirit has quite high mobility, and he gets onto ranged squishy damage dealers, of which there are, quite a few in this meta at the moment that he can get onto and burst them down. And I think he now has an item he feels good about upgrading from Witchblade, because Witchblade is sort of a core part of his kit. But if I'm not mistaken, it built into Revenants before the patch, and he wasn't excited about that. But now his Witchblade builds into Parasma, which he's very excited about building. He can also choose to go something like a Kai Sanjin or an E-Blade if he wishes, or he can go the new Revenants. He has a lot of options for blowing enemies up. The reason, if you're not aware, why I keep referencing going E-Blade and Kai Sanj is that E-Blade now doesn't build out a Kaya, so you can have an E-Blade in addition to a Kai Sanj, which will increase the target's magic damage they take, and you can combine this with Revenants, which allows you to hit ethereal units and do magic damage to them. So I was actually debating putting Silencer on this list, because I think Silencer is like the best user of these items, but Silencer's not really great as a mid. If he was played, he would almost be better as a position 1 or like an offlaner or something, so that's why I didn't put him on here. So Storm Spirit does use these items well. He's just somewhat difficult to play, of course. If you, ult in and your target gets away with 1 health, not only is that bad, but you now have exhausted all your mana, so the enemy can kill you. And if he gets behind, he doesn't have as much utility as some of these other mids, so he's a little bit less useful. Okay, Lina. Lina uses all those items I just referenced, so Parasma, E-Blade, Kai Sanj, Revenants, but she also has a very powerful lane phase, and the biggest thing that they did to benefit Lina was they not only removed her pure damage Laguna Blade talent. That was actually, in my estimation, a nerf to Lina, because BKB makes you immune to pure damage if it doesn't pierce spell immunity. So if Lina ulted you with Laguna Blade and it's pure, it wouldn't really do damage. It wouldn't do damage to you. I might be corrected on that, but that's my recollection of it. Now she has this talent where they replaced it with a new one where she now has a crit on enemies hit by Dragon Slave. So Lina has phenomenal late game auto attack DPS, which factors very well into these new magic damage auto attack items. Lina, of course, also, is like the preeminent lane stomper in the game right now. And like a lot of the meta is based around like, can you survive Lina? That's why even something like a Dragon Knight isn't in D tier, because that's why you can pick Dragon Knight, is to survive Lina. So yeah. Death Prophet. I was debating maybe putting Death Prophet down, because she did get a little bit nerfed this last letter patch, but not enough to where I think it really moved her. She uses some of the other new powerful items in this patch very effectively. So she uses Shivas very well, which increases the damage enemies take from spells on top of a couple of other things. And she uses, just in general, a lot of the defensive items in the game pretty well. I think she uses Bloodstone okay. Even though they kind of nerfed Bloodstone, she doesn't care too much about losing the mana. Rather, it increases the AoE on her abilities, which is nice. More than change, actually, I guess, for Death Prophet, it's less with the items, more just with the silence slowing you. So Death Prophet can kind of run you down now. And she takes turrets effectively. I think she might be a little bit better of an offlaner. It definitely actually is a better offlaner than a mid laner. But it's hard for me with just how powerful the character is to really put her much lower. Next we have Puck. Puck has a kit that enables him to get through the lane phase quite well, because he kind of just avoids you by using his Q and his dash and untarget ability, so he kind of avoids you in the lane phase, and then he runs around and kills all your teammates with the ultimate On top of that, he scales well, because with his Scepter, his ultimate auto-attacking you, he can still do something like a, Scepter Daedalus late game, and wreck your team. So this is a very powerful, maybe the most powerful ganking hero. Invoker is still the powerful jack-of-all-trades hero in competitive, where he doesn't really have any bad matchups. That's still true. He runs around with stealth. He EMP tornadoes you, and uses his, I forget the name of the ability, the triple Q. Which one is that? Cold Snap.
Fight me.
And you're dead. So this guy's still very strong. He also is an auto-attacker. He can also buff up his teammates in sieges. He can also send out his summons to farm camps and gain vision. He also has the Ice Wall to block off enemy movement. He has a disarm. This character has everything still. On top of having an AoE Dispel, which doesn't get said enough, I think. So this guy's still very good. Primal, even though Primal's been nerfed time and time and time again, I just think this character's fucking great. His laning matchups are not as OP because they've nerfed his trample, if I'm not mistaken, but he still, rampages into lane with his Q, hits you with his ultimate, which is a BKB piercing stun. He has, his ability to go Heart's gone because that item's gutted, but he can still do other items again, Blade Mail, Shiva's, BKB, Lotus if he feels like it, Kaisaj if he feels like it, or even something like Ashikaya for movement speed to synergize with his trample. This guy's still the king in my opinion. Yeah, he has a break with his Scepter. His Aghanim's Shard stun has been buffed, so it's kind of hard for Final Beast to hit the stun on you from far away. It's actually because it's a little bit slow, but Primal Beast can use his Aghanim Shard to kind of chain CC you, because he can jump in on you, stun you, wait for his teammates, and then use his ultimate or vice versa, jump in, ult, and then after the ult goes off, use the shard on you. So he's still just incredibly powerful. Queen of Pain is still an exceptionally good laner, though not maybe as dominant as she once was, because there's, I think, a little bit less melee characters for her to play into, but she still is just maybe the best ganker in Dota. It's hard to argue. She's definitely up there with her ultimate and her mobility. In late game, while she lacks a little bit of damage, she has plenty of utility with her silence on her shard and her
queen.
AoE on her Scepter. This character still has, a somewhat useful late game. She's just lacking in kind of carry damage, but that's not really what you need from mid. You need a character to, again, spike hard at level 6 to 8, run around and kill people. That's what Queen of Pain does. Outworld. This is, I would say, the second or third best carry from mid. He has, I don't think people are doing the Solar Crest build as much, but Outworld, with his, I think that the spell Lifesteal talent they gave him was arguably a buff. He has a lot of sustain, a lot of damage, pretty good ganking with his W, that you do have to have some team coordination. It's kind of similar to Shadow Demon, which is why Shadow Demon is not really ever going to be too good outside of competitive, or at least reach his full potential. But in a competitive environment where you can play around, and in this case with Outworld's Astral Imprisonment, he has pretty good ganking on a single target, and again, pretty good carry ability into the late game.
The blood sun rises.
Then the character I think is most powerful from mid lane currently is Zeus. So Zeus benefits from all of the item changes I referenced earlier. In addition to this, Zeus just does what feels like phenomenal damage at every point in the game. He has a little bit of a fragile lane phase. If he gets killed or something before he gets bottled, that can kind of be a problem, or killed before kind of certain points. But oh yeah, I even forgot to mention it. Zeus benefits also from Kanda, because he has an item to upgrade from Phylactery. So this character is supreme when it comes down to damage. His ganking on the surface isn't amazing, but he ganks with his ultimate, and his ultimate does crazy damage, and it does percentage health damage on top of doing flat damage. So he kind of ganks by, he can gank either actively by literally showing up and killing you with his incredible damage in his ultimate, or he can AFK gank and just farm with his shard and like Monta style and just ult. Either is perfectly fine. So that's why I would say that this guy is, the best mid on this patch. So thank you for the other one. I'll put in. There was a hero I didn't include in here. I referenced him, but I didn't. There's actually two. I'll just reference them quickly. Magnus, I think that I would feel comfortable putting Magnus in B tier. This character is
Keep your eye on
quite a
my
potent
horn.
ganker, and he's a little bit weird in lane. You have to the only win lane you have to knock enemies into your turret, otherwise you're not gonna kill them. But his ganking is incredible. He doesn't even need Blink Dagger, though he can go that. He could just go into Harpoon and, reverse polarity onto enemies. And he has, an AoE BKB piercing stun, which is quite strong. So I would feel comfortable putting him top of B tier. You know what, I'll just do that right now. Because I do think that he's quite good. And then the last one would be, that I would actually consider putting on the list, to be Lone Druid. Lone Druid has been nerfed, but Lone Druid, which I'll actually put him in high B tier as well. You know what? I forgot. I don't know why I just didn't have him on here. As I'm talking about Lone Druid, I'll find him. Lone Druid has a lot of good matchups in the mid lane, and he plays kind of similar to a Dragon Knight, where he is able to kind of generate an income lead by not having to recall, because he has sustain. He presses towers. It's difficult to kill him, because in his ultimate form he gains a bunch of health and he can simply fear you away. The only problem is Lone Druid's ganks are not that great, which is why I can't really put him above B tier. But for a little bit more of a style of play about strangling the enemy out, kind of coincidentally similar to Arcworn, Lone Druid's quite good. And then Meepo, I would put, Meepo's just broken at the moment. He just is overstated.
Yeah.
I don't think I would put him any higher than A tier in competitive. I think if this was just for pumps, I'd put him in S tier. Meepo can just fucking kill you at any time that he hits his snare on you, because his W just does such bonkers damage. And in pumps where people aren't farming as efficiently, the Meepo player can just farm all the resources on the map and he'll just be huge. In a competitive game, I don't think that's going to happen as much, but I think Meepo is just so broken that I think he could be played in competitive anyhow. So that actually does complete my tier list now. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe if you so choose. Appreciate it.